Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session of Is Genesis History. Our topic today is Day 1 of Creation, which of course is found in the book of Genesis, so it's fair game. We can look into this text and see what we can absorb out of it. There's just so much there. Well, before we get into the text itself, we want to do a little bit of background study, as we would always want to, studying a certain book of the Bible. We need to know who wrote it, when was it written, what's the occasion, what's the purpose of the writing. All those kinds of things are essential to being able to interpret the text accurately as we study it in its context. So we begin with a little bit of a map here, a look at a map, which is not the best map I could offer you or the one with the best resolution, but it graphically displays for you an important part of biblical history, especially as we begin the book of Genesis, giving us some of the areas that are discussed throughout Genesis. For example, we have the Fertile Crescent in green, which represents basically a half of a circle with its high point on the top. And that begins here in the lower right, where we have the cities of, for example, Ur and Uruk. And in an earlier presentation, we talked about the city of Uruk and how important it was in the time around the Tower of Babel. This is just to the northwest of the Persian Gulf. And then as we follow the rivers actually going upstream instead of downstream, the Euphrates on the left, Tigris on the right, we come to the top of the circle near the site of Haran, where Abram settled on his way to Canaan. Then we make our way down the left side of the Fertile Crescent, and we get into what's called the Levant, sometimes called the Western Levant, even though there is no Eastern Levant. And the Western Levant consists of ancient Syria, Phoenicia on the coast, and then Canaan, which later becomes known as Israel and known to many as Palestine. Then if we actually follow the road, if you will, because the international highway called the Great Trunk Road in the Old Testament and the Via Maris in the New Testament makes its way along the Philistine plain down to Wadi El Arish. And at Wadi El Arish, that's basically the ancient border with Egypt. And the road changes names and becomes the Ways of Horus. And that road then leads into Egypt, actually into the eastern Nile Delta. And it ends right at the site of Avaris, which I tried to persuade you in an earlier session is the site to where Jacob moved his family in 1876 BC. Then, of course, you could follow the yellow in the photograph, and again, you're going upstream as you go to the south, up the Nile River, from Lower Egypt into Upper Egypt. And of course, as we also talked about before, Egypt is known to the Egyptians and to the Israelites as the two lands. It's Upper Egypt in the south, it's Lower Egypt in the north. And the Hebrew word actually for Egypt, which is Mitzrayim, is actually in the dual, not in singular, not in plural. It's in dual because of the pair of Upper and Lower Egypt. So that gives us a little bit of a glance at the geography of the land. Now we move to the question of authorship. Well, there is no clear statement, if you didn't know, in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, that describe or that state clearly, I am the author and my name is Moses. There is no such statement. So we have to infer from statements both within the Pentateuch itself and in other scriptures that attest to Moses being the author. I understand that in scholarly circles today it's not so popular to hold to the belief that Moses is the author of the book of Genesis and the rest of the Pentateuch, but I think there's enough reason for us to maintain that view, and there's definitely not any tangible reason for us to abandon that. For example, if you look in Deuteronomy 31:9, it says, Moses wrote this law, that is the Torah in Hebrew, and he gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of he who is, and that's the covenant name of God. The one who goes on existing, that's his infiniteness expressed in his name, which is in the form of a participle, which is very common in ancient languages for names. Also in Exodus 17:14 it states, "Then he who is said to Moses, write this in a book," or a scroll, if you will, "as a memorial, and recite it to Joshua, that I utterly will blot out the memory of Amalek from under the sky." So in this statement, you can see that God is speaking to Moses and telling him to write down all of these things on a scroll. And probably this is referring to a papyrus scroll that you could have in a long form, and it's laminated together, and then it can be rolled up into a scroll when it's complete. And so such scrolls with these kinds of writings would be kept, maintained, and later added in to the narrative, to the story at the right point, as the writings that go into the Pentateuch and the book of Genesis are assembled. And then there are other verses such as Exodus 24:4, Exodus 34:27, etc., that also attest within the Pentateuch itself and give us reason to believe that Moses was the author. And again, we won't look at the passages outside of the Pentateuch, but there are plenty of places outside of the Pentateuch that also argue vehemently that Moses is the author of various books of the Pentateuch. Even Jesus himself referred to Moses being the author of certain statements that he would quote that came out of the Pentateuch. So if you don't trust me, if you don't trust the rest of the prophets, if you don't trust some of the statements in the Pentateuch itself, trust Jesus. He gave us the green light that this was written by Moses. Now, can Moses be attested to outside of the Bible? And this is one of the problems why there's so much criticism whether there was a historical Moses or not. Well, I have news for you. If you consult my book that just came out in January of 2017 called The World's Oldest Alphabet, Hebrew as the Language of the Proto-Consonantal Script, you will know that there is an inscription that mentions Moses. I was very surprised when I came across this, but basically for 150 years scholars have tried to pinpoint which Semitic language is behind the world's oldest alphabet. Now, that doesn't make it the world's oldest writing. It's not. The world's oldest writing is found in Uruk from the Jemdet-Nasr period in southern Mesopotamia. It's known as cuneiform. Then the second oldest is hieroglyphic, Egyptian, which actually is not too long. It appears, it surfaces not too long after cuneiform comes into being. And then from Egypt, within Egypt, is the origin of the world's oldest alphabetic script, which is a pictographic script borrowed from 22 of the 800 plus hieroglyphs in what we call the sign list. It's like an alphabet of hieroglyphics. But from that, all they needed was 22 to represent the 22 consonants in Hebrew. So I stumbled into all of this. I never expected to be the one that God would reveal all of this to in His divine sense of humor, but He gave me a great responsibility, and that is to communicate it to the world. So having concluded, for reasons I won't go into, that Hebrew is the language of the world's oldest alphabet, I then was able to solve the disputed letters among the 22 that scholars didn't agree on or haven't agreed on over the many, many decades. And through that living laboratory of a corpus of texts, I translated 15 of those inscriptions. 3 of those inscriptions include biblical figures. The wife of Joseph named Asnath, Ahisamach in Exodus 31, who is the father of Aholiab, one of the 2 men that God appointed to build the tabernacle. And then thirdly, Moses himself. And Moses can be found right here. This is the wave of water, Hebrew mayim letter. It makes the m sound. This is shadayim, the Hebrew word for breasts. M and sh together make Moshe. Moshe is the name of Moses in Hebrew, and it appears right here on Sinai 361. The entire inscription shows that the timing is just before the Exodus, probably in that year, 1447, 1446, when Moses had returned from Midian and he was called on by God to take God's people out of Egypt. And it was during that period, of course, that the Israelites were experiencing the worst of their oppression at the hands of the Egyptians under a number of kings, but the final one being Amenhotep II, and you can read about that in my Master's Seminary Journal article of 2006, available for free online on academia.edu. So that being the case, the sense within the inscription as you translate it reveals the continuation of this tense situation and gives you the feel for what they were experiencing. Here's how it reads. Our bound servitude had lingered. Moses then provoked astonishment. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? What did Moses do in the year before the Exodus? He provoked astonishment by turning a staff into a snake and, all of the 10 plagues that went on Egypt. Those qualify, don't they, as astonishing events. And then the end of the inscription says it is a year of astonishment because of the lady. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later presentation. So we now know we have physical evidence that attests to Moses himself, validating him as a historical figure. And that then takes us to the date of the book of Genesis. Well, I'll skip all the discussion so that we can get to the text, but in short, when you take all of the factors together for dating in the Old Testament, based on 967 is the year of the construction beginning on the temple, the first temple, known to many as the Solomonic temple. 1 Kings 6:1 clearly says in the 480th year after the Exodus, that's when the temple building began. So we go 479 years and change back into the past from 967, which takes us to 1446. And there are all kinds of extra-biblical forms of evidence, such as the Jubilee cycle and the Parian marble, etc., especially found in articles written by Roger Young, which you can also download for free from his academia.edu webpage, which will confirm 1446 as the right year for the Exodus. That being the case, Joshua 5:6 makes it clear that the conquest occurred 40 years after the Exodus, meaning 1406 BC. And as I argue in my 2008 article on Hatzor, the site of Hatzor, and which destruction of Hatzor is the one connected with the destruction under Joshua, I try to prove to you the very date for when the Israelites entered into Canaan, crossing the Jordan from Transjordan. And that would be then, Moses would have written the Pentateuch before the 28th of April, 1406 BC. All of that you can read in my article. So, what about the purpose? Well, he who is the covenant God of Israel knew that the Israelites would not fully extinguish the Amorites, the Canaanites, and all the other ites who were in the land as God had instructed them. God knew it. They wouldn't do this. So what did he do? He gave them Genesis 1 through 11 as a vaccination, if you will, against the adverse effects that would be created by constant exposure to a poisonous worldview. Does that sound familiar? What's our culture like today? Is it a poisonous worldview or worldviews all around us, hovering like birds, trying to influence us, impact us, and make our lives conform with the lives of those who hold those worldviews? That's exactly what the Israelites were going to experience. God knew they would still be there because they wouldn't carry out his command. So rather than being angry at them, he was compassionate with them and gave them Genesis 1 through 11 to vaccinate them so that they could live among the Gentile people with an ungodly worldview and live successfully. God himself expressly warned his people in reference to the wicked Canaanites, "For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of he who is will be kindled against you." Thus God, out of kindness and the desire to prevent his people from falling away from him and being subject to his fury, provided them with a God-centered worldview in order to enable them to thrive among the godless peoples of Canaan. This, folks, is the purpose of Genesis 1 through 11. That's why he wrote it, knowing what life would be like for them in Canaan. So that brings us, and we could talk more about background matters, but we'll skip the rest and jump right into the text because of time. And we'll look at, beginning with Genesis 1:1, which is an absolutely beautiful statement in Hebrew. Now, I want you to hear me recite Genesis 1:1 in Hebrew and tell me where is the accent here, where is the emphasis here. You should hear it in my voice. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. Let me try that one more time in case you didn't catch it. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. Where did I put the emphasis? Bereshit, the first word. Why? Because it does not follow standard default Hebrew syntactical structure. Hebrew is VSO, verb, subject, object, which we know of as direct object, and then modifiers. That's not what we find here. We find an adverbial phrase that's put at the very beginning and everything else follows. It's out of standard order, word order. Don't let anyone ever tell you that word order doesn't mean anything in the Hebrew or the Greek language. It does. It means a great deal. Now, they have versatility that we don't have because they have highly inflected languages, especially Greek. But the bottom line is word order does mean something. So Moses' point is to focus on the time period when this happened, which is amazing because if you ask me, all of the other things in the text are really a lot juicier, a lot more exciting. But we miss his main point when we do that. Well, let's come back to that. Let's not talk about that for now. Let's move on to those other fun things and come back to that word that came first. The second word is bara. And that, let's see. Oh, well, before we talk about bara, let's talk about the third word. Because in English, we don't have VSO. We don't have verb, subject, direct object. We have subject, verb, direct object. How is that? Johnny, subject, hit, verb, the ball, direct object, right? That's our typical pattern. So we want to start with the subject, right? So let's start with the subject of this sentence, which is Elohim. Elohim, first we want to focus on the end of the word. Whether you agree with me or not, I am convinced that the application of this word in plural in Hebrew, with the im ending right here, the vowel hirek yod is an e sound, and then the m sound, im. Im ending is plural. Well, we have plurality in God already in the first statement in the entire Bible. Now, obviously you know that we're talking about the creation event, and that creation event is described as enjoying, if you will, the involvement of all three members of the Trinity. We have the Father in Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image." That statement is a moment in time where you get to be a fly on the wall in the discussions among the Godhead, right? And you're listening to them talk amongst, I don't want to say themselves. You're listening to them talk among himself, right? The Father saying, okay, now it's time, let us make mankind, not in my image, in our image. Once again, we have that plurality right there. But this is probably the chief member of the Godhead, the Father himself, announcing what is going to take place. The time has come, let's launch. So they're going to make man in the image of God. And then the Son is involved too, because if you look in Colossians 1:13-16, it says this, and that's obviously just a portion of that text, but it says, "For by him," and in the context we know that's his Son, the Son of the Father, for by him all things were created. So the Son is the active agent who brings creation into being in his pre-incarnate form before he ever comes to the earth as Jesus Christ. Then third, the Spirit of God, Genesis 1:2, was hovering over the surface of the waters. The Spirit of God had a consolidating role. He had an observing role. He had an evaluating role as he was there experiencing all of this, immediately hovering, like, you look at a picture, a video of a hovercraft. It's amazing how those things work on the water. Hovercraft, right? He's just hovering right over the surface of the waters, even in the darkness, able to observe the beauty in creation. So all three members of the Godhead are part of this, and that's why Moses uses this plurality of God in the subject of who's involved behind creation. Who is it? It's not just one member of the Trinity. It's God in his triunity who is responsible for creation. And we see that plurality screaming out at us. And that brings us to the second word, the second part of this word, which is El in its singular form. El is the name of the king of the gods in the second millennium BC throughout most or all of the Levant. He is the king of the gods. And the Israelites are not bashful about using that name from the ancient Near Eastern historical world and applying it to their understanding of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They don't mind that. Why? Because they're focusing on the association of who's behind that God. It's like Paul when he speaks of, this is to an unknown God. He doesn't say, well, you can't, this couldn't be anything talking about the real God. No, he connects it to the religious thought of the people who were there. He links that statement to the true and living God. And I think in the same way, the biblical writers throughout some of the Hebrew Bible, and especially in the Pentateuch, they use the word, even in singular, El, as king of the gods, to talk about God himself. So if you were to strip away the plurality here, you'd be left with El. And that's the significance of El. Well, in one of those inscriptions that I've translated, and this one dates to 1834 BC, and you didn't hear that incorrectly, 1834 BC, a Hebrew inscription mentions God using this name El. In its Wadi al-Hol inscription 2, you can see a beautiful image of it here from Dynasty 12. This is located in Upper Egypt at a military outpost that oversees a large stretch of the Nile River, because where it's located, the Nile River, as it flows northerly, it has to curve around this area like this and then go up. And so that entire swath of the Nile River becomes one that you can, from an outpost high above, you can oversee a large stretch of that Nile River. And so they put a military outpost there. And there was a lot of writing from antiquity found at this place called Wadi al-Hol. And one of those inscriptions, two of them, are in Proto-Consonantal Hebrew. And this one, Wadi al-Hol 2, reads like this: surrounding the crooked one, and this is the oldest Hebrew proverb now in the world. Surrounding the crooked one, your afflictor is God. Surrounding the crooked one, your afflictor is God. And the word for God is right here, El. The very last two, V12 and V13. Those are the two consonants that give us El. And even other scholars admit this is El here, even though they don't necessarily know or agree that this is Hebrew. It is Hebrew, and that's El. And the Israelites already in 1834 are using El to speak of God. Because what they're saying is this: it's like one Hebrew is speaking to another Hebrew. And that Hebrew, his friend, is speaking to his friend, and his friend is experiencing really troubled times in his business. Maybe he's a potter. And he has a little warehouse where he stores all of his pots. And every time he goes in the morning to his warehouse, Some of his pots are smashed on the ground, and some are gone, stolen. Every day this happens to him, and he just doesn't know what to do. So his fellow Hebrew puts his arm around him, and he says, "Oh, my dear friend, be strong and courageous." Right? Why? Because, read it here, surrounding the crooked one, that person who is stealing your pots and breaking others among them, surrounding that crooked person, your afflictor, he's afflicting you through this. Surrounding that person is God. You know what God's like? He's like a boa constrictor. And this is why the text is written to wrap around that hieroglyph, which is iconographically used there to represent life. That's the Ankh sign. It means life. And I think that means the life of the crooked person. And just as the text is wrapping around the crooked person, and that's extremely rare, if not unattested elsewhere, where a text will actually wrap like this, the idea is this: God is like a boa constrictor. He's going to wrap himself around an evil person. It takes a snake a long time to get there, doesn't it? But once the snake is there, all of a sudden, the squeezing begins, and it gets tighter and tighter, and the prey runs out of ability to breathe, right? The lungs won't expand anymore. That's what they die from, asphyxiation. So God is like that. He's the boa constrictor who wraps himself around the evil person and will choke him out in his timing, in his way, with his methods, whatever that takes, however long it takes, so you, my dear fellow Hebrew, can take heed, because God is protecting you. And he will take care of that evil person who's afflicting you out of the crookedness of his heart. Isn't that amazing? And so in that incredible Hebrew poetical structure, we have at the end, El. And here, Hebrew is using the last word in the sentence, in the proverb, as the one that's in the emphatic position. He waits till the end to say who it is who's the one who's going to take care of all of this for you. Who is it? It's El. It's the king of the gods. It's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the one. You see how this is? It's amazing. So, that same word is found in plural in Genesis 1:1. The king of the gods. In plural. That's the beauty of Genesis 1:1 right away, right off the bat. Okay. Let's move on. We come to the second word. The second word and the second area of our focus. We've got the subject, now we look at the verb. The verb here is bara. Bara. Now, does this verb bara necessarily imply ex nihilo creation? Dr. Boyd spoke already about ex nihilo. I don't think he defined it. Ex nihilo means out of nothing. Does the verb require the meaning out of nothing? The answer is actually no. Why? Well, look at Genesis 1:27. It says, so God created, here's bara again. God, barad, he created the man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Then we go on down to 2:7. And it says, then, so here, then, he who is, that's the covenant name of God, Yahweh. Then he who is, and then we have a different verb, formed the man from the dust of the ground. So, let's see, did that make the point I wanted to make? Okay, somehow I'm forgetting the point I wanted to make here, but you're going to have to trust me that it was good. All right, so we move on. So the bottom line is this. God, only context can tell us if the word bara means an out-of-nothing creation. And clearly, this is an out-of-nothing creation because, remember our word that's in the emphatic position here, out of order, if you will. Bereshit, in beginning, literally. In beginning, that's when it happened. Before anything else, In the very beginning, God created. So there was no straw, hay, or stubble to use that's already in existence. He is speaking this into being. It's an out-of-nothing creation. It's the beginning of the known universe. That's what it is. So, with that being the case, now we want to go to the direct object. And we have actually two direct objects here. They're governed by direct object markers 8 here and we 8. We means and here. Or actually, no, we need to talk about this. We is a conjunction that can be either a coordinating conjunction or a subordinating conjunction. We'll come to that in a minute. So 8, and then there's another we 8 there, so we have two direct objects. God created two things as described in this verse. Now, Genesis 1:1, and Dr. Boyd referred to this, is often taken to be kind of like a book heading or a chapter heading or a section heading. And it's then stripped of its meaning. It's stripped of the literalness of the creation that's just blasting out like a trumpet within this verse. Why is this often done? That's a good question, and here's the answer. Because if you go down in the text to chapter 2, verse 4, and by the way, whoever divided chapter 1 and 2, in my opinion, didn't do a good job. The division should take place after 2:4, not at the end of 131. Because 2:4 says this: these are the histories or the stories of the cosmos and the earth. In there having been created on the day, he who is God made the earth and the cosmos. So you see a repetition within 2:4 of much of what we see in Genesis 1:1. This is spoken of in literary terms as an inclusio. It's like two brackets, or if you're into lunch meals, it's too early to think about lunch, of course, you would have a sandwich with the bread on top and bottom and the good stuff in the middle. So, you know, what is the bread, right? The meat's the really important part. So let's de-emphasize the bread, the ends, the brackets. But you can't do that, folks. This is not a chapter heading. It's not a book heading. It's not a portion heading. It's genuine text itself, full of rich meaning. The fact that there is this literary relationship there does not take anything away from what's in Genesis 1:1. Moreover, there's a difference between the creation in Genesis 1 and account of the creation in Genesis 1 and the account in Genesis 2. I remember years ago, in the 80s, I took a course at it was a community college in Southern California. And the professor was telling us, you can't trust the Bible, if for no other reason, because you have two competing creation accounts, one in Genesis 1 and one in Genesis 2. And I, of course, had steam coming out of my ears when I heard all of this, and it didn't sit well at all with me. And I understood even at that time, you can't judge the text that way. Well, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, properly divided, have different purposes. Genesis 2 is a focus on the pinnacle of creation. The pinnacle of creation. Who or what is the pinnacle of creation in Genesis 2? Anybody? Mankind. Exactly. Mankind. That's what is screaming out at you about chapter 2. Chapter 1, though, is different. The focus is on the what of creation. Anybody? The fill in the blank. The what of creation. The order of creation. Exactly. The focus is on the order of creation. We have day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. It's clockwork. Tick, 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 right? That's the order of creation being emphasized. That being the case, it helps us understand Genesis 1:1 even better. How? Let me describe that. So, in beginning, God, the God exists, no, the King of the gods existing in multi-person form, right? Created, implied out of nothing because of context. What? Something. Well, there is a first thing he creates, folks, a first thing. What is that first thing? No. No. I'll give you a hint. It's right there. One thing, not two. The cosmos, exactly. That's what he creates first. You know what this is like? This is like God as the divine painter, right? What does a painter do? Oh yeah, I know, he has to get his big easel out and he has to, or he or she, whatever, has to put a piece of canvas on there and make the palette all up with all the colors. But when all the palette is ready and the colors are there and he's got the brush in hand, what does he draw first? What does he draw first? And I'm not even an artist. Believe it or not, I know this. I know the answer. What does the painter draw first on his canvas? Dips his paintbrush in a color and he starts drawing almost, not quite the outline, but maybe there is no sky. The backdrop, the background, that's what he or she draws first, right? That's what the divine painter has drawn first. The backdrop. And he's taken his black brush and he's brushed it, except that, guess what? There's no left border, no right border, no top border, no bottom border. It is a boundless backdrop. It's a three-dimensional, boundless backdrop. That's what he creates first. There was no empty space before God created it. Now, the Hebrew word here is shemayim, okay? Shemayim. That's the Hebrew word, the first thing created. What is the shemayim? Well, we know it as at least three different things in the Bible. The shemayim can be used of the abode of God. The shemayim can be used of deep, dark outer space. And it can be used of the bright blue sky during the day. Any one of those qualifies. So we need to understand that in its context and pick the right one. Is it saying here that God is creating his abode? Yes or no? No, that isn't it at all. Is it saying here that he's creating the bright blue sky that we see during the day? No. Process of elimination tells us it's the expanse of the universe. Shemayim means this. Okay, the Bible was written perspectively, not scientifically, perspectively. I guess at a science conference you're not allowed to say something like that about science, are you? But I did. Hopefully it'll be edited. So it's written perspectively, not scientifically. It's written from the perspective of a person standing on planet Earth, looking down, looking out, or looking up. And when that person looks up, he or she sees the shemayim. So the abode of God, it's somewhere up from where we are standing on earth. The blue sky, it's somewhere up from where I am in the land of Israel. The cosmos at night, it's always up from my perspective. That's what it means. But in this case, it's God as the divine painter painting the backdrop, and it's the deep, endless expanse of the universe with nothing in it. That's what he makes first. Now, then we come to the conjunction I told you about, the wet conjunction, because it's going to introduce the second thing in creation. The wet conjunction can be used as a coordinating conjunction or a subordinating conjunction, and I love grammar. You can probably see it. A coordinating conjunction is and, but, or. Right? It joins things together. And does, but does, or does. Joins things together. But subordinating conjunctions show subordination. It's putting something below something else, isn't it? Logically or spatially or temporally, whatever. Well, examples of this are just like, the stars of the sky. Before, after, during, while, because, since. You can go on and on and on. Now, when I first studied Hebrew in my second year of Hebrew as a student, our professor, who was trained at Cornell, said to us, I'm going to give you an exercise and give you a huge text with a bunch of wow conjunctions in it. And you have to interpret every one of them in their context and come out with the right subordinating or coordinating conjunction. Whew, that was hard work. Of course, payback time came when I taught Hebrew and I did it to my students. And they had to do the same. That was when it was fun, okay? But it's not an exercise in futility, because that's the versatility of a Hebrew wow conjunction. You have to use the context to interpret it correctly. You can't just by default say and. It doesn't work that way. You don't know the Hebrew language well if that's your opinion. So in the context, where are we again? Are we in Genesis 2, where the focus is the pinnacle of creation, or are we on the focus of chapter 1, where it is the what of creation? The order of creation. We have order here, folks. We have a 1, we have a 2. So my suggested interpretation for the wet conjunction is not and, but then. The God who exists in plurality, who's the King of the gods, created out of nothing, in the very beginning, that which is above from the perspective of a person standing on earth, in this case, the deep, dark expanse of the universe, then he created the eretz, the earth. Earth is number 2 in his creation order. It's not number 2 because it's less significant. It's number 1 was the backdrop. We needed the background. We needed a 3-dimensional universe in which the earth could be positioned, didn't we? It had to be first. But because earth is created second before any other celestial body, earth becomes not necessarily the center of the universe. What does that mean when you have an infinite universe anyway, right? It's the center of God's plan for what he wants to accomplish within the universe. That's what earth is. So now he's preparing us for Genesis 2 by drawing on his canvas, second, this big globe in the middle, planet Earth. Because planet Earth is the stage on which his plans will be fulfilled through mankind, who's the pinnacle of his creation anyway. See how that works? Isn't that beautiful? Do you see how rich Genesis 1:1 is? Is this not jump up and down stuff? This is cool. That's what God did. He created the earth as the first created body within the universe, because earth is the place on which mankind would stand and live. What a beautiful thing. So, now verse 2, the earth was unformed and unfilled, and darkness was over the surface of the primordial deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Because I've left myself short on time, we're really going to fly over this at 30,000 feet, verse 2. But the idea is that, God now is moving on, and now that he's drawn his backdrop, the universe, the black expanse of the universe, and he's drawn the most important thing on his canvas, which is the earth. Now Moses is going to focus attention on the earth itself and give us more background about what's happening on planet Earth at the time. Well, the earth at this point, he's telling us, because his people, his listeners, are used to a world that's filled with things, right? Plants, animals, fellow people, wicked Canaanites, you name it, the earth is full of it. He's telling us, now, take note, listener, at this time, the earth was unformed and unfilled. It's not that it was in a state of chaos. Chaos is not the point of tohu wavohu. It's something that's unaccomplished. It's something that's empty, that's not fully formed. It needs forming. It needs to be completed. And darkness was over the surface of the primordial deep. So the primordial deep, of course, referring to the world covered with this thick water. And at this time, there's now that the earth is completed, there is no light visible. So there's darkness. When the earth is completed and there's water over it, there's no light around. It's completely dark. Now, whether anyone at the conference would disagree with me or not, I would suggest to you that the first light actually created was the light that's at the center of the earth, which we know today as energy in the form of liquid magma. Okay? So that he evidently cooled on its core, added water to surround it, and the Spirit of God was hovering over this now, closed system, if you will, for now, closed system for now, and therefore the darkness reflects his inability or anyone's inability to see anything on the surface of the earth. But the Spirit of God was there, hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," so there was light. We started 10 minutes late because of a malfunction, so we're going to go a little further. Then God said, "Let there be light," so there was light. So now we have the creation of a light source in day one. When is SOL, soul, created, our sun? Day 4. Not day 1, day 4. So this can't be that light. It can't be the light, and a lot of people would suggest that this light was God himself. You know why that doesn't work? Look in Revelation. Look at the new earth. There is no darkness on the new earth, is there? Why? Why is there no darkness? Because God what?
Sitting on his throne. He's there. His presence.
More than that, the text says. God himself is that light. So, God being the light now, there's no place anywhere for darkness, is there? There's no place for darkness. This can't be God. Like it or not, it can't be God. Has to be something else. So the question is, what was the source of this light of day one? So God saw the light that it was good, and God made a division between the light and the darkness. Then God named the light day, and the darkness he named night, etc. Now, what we know graphically is that there is some light source out there shining light on the earth, because we just read God saw the light that it was good, and God made a division between the light and the darkness. What does that mean? It means that light has to be in a single source in relation to the earth. It's not all around the earth to shine light on all parts of the earth. It was cutting a division between day and night. What is that? The light's coming from one source. All of this side of the earth is lit. All of this side of the earth has to be in darkness, because this is the point of division in the top, and this is the point of division at the bottom. So it has to be a single entity somewhere that is that light. Now, I don't have time to go into the theory that I would suggest behind all of this, but I would propose that based on the fact that astronomy shows us that we have one or more, and scientists are more inclined to say more, we have examples of one or more, probably more, outward expansions from a single point within our universe. And they then go a step further, and they draw up this entire Big Bang Theory, which, of course, Danny Faulkner, wants to shoot with arrows and anything else, he can put in his hands. Okay, we can forget about the Big Bang Theory, but the astronomy definitely shows us that we have this one or more outward expansions, and it's been discovered now that it's been mathematically proven that from at least one of those expansions, the outward movement of light can be detected to have been faster than the speed of light. That is provable now. That being the case, the original light from this could have been traveling at a speed faster than light. God could have made its light experienced on earth as quickly as he wanted to. Could have been light in motion, whatever. But the bottom line is, it cuts a difference between the day and the night. And I would suggest to you, again, I won't go into the whole theory, but that the outward expansion of one or more of these, let's call it a glob of heat, light, energy, et cetera, that this was the material from which on day 4 God would create the stars. All he would have to do is take this glob or these globs, wherever they were positioned in the universe, set them in motion outward, and that would create, like a fireworks show, it would create all of the stars in the universe. So this fits all of the data and the biblical text perfectly. Okay, again, I'll skip all the details and come right to the end, which is in 1:5. And this is very important, and this is a very excellent place for us to end. 1:5 says, and again, it's my translation, "Then God named the light day, and the darkness he named night." And by the way, my just quick observation on this. Notice what he's naming. He's not naming the objects. He's naming their impact on the earth, because that is the center of his stage, right? Day is the ability for a person standing on planet Earth to see the light for a whatever hour period, 10, 12, whatever the daylight is for that day. And the night is that person's ability to see, standing on the other side, the dark side of the earth, what's visible in the universe from that position, pointed or sitting there in darkness. Then we come to the end, and this is beautiful, because this destroys so many errant theories, but it's usually not understood correctly. "So it was evening and it was morning," and then I'll come to what follows. So that statement that "so it was evening and it was morning," now we're talking about what? The revolution of the earth on its axis, one complete time. That's what it's implying, boldly and powerfully. Now, the other statement is this that I need to make. All of the other days of creation, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're all ordinal numbers. What are ordinal numbers? 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. In Hebrew, that's how they're written. This is not written that way. And in every English translation I've looked at, maybe I haven't looked at enough, it actually has a poor translation of the final statement. It doesn't say day 1. That's not what the Hebrew reads. It reads one day. What's the importance of that? Moses is defining for us what is a day. It's the turning of the earth on its axis, one time around, which is able to distinguish between the darkness and the light, right? He made a division between the light and the darkness. He named it the light day, and the darkness he named night. So it was evening and it was morning. It turned once on its axis. And then he's saying, definition, one day. One day. That comprises one day. And it screams back at us the importance of time there in relation to Genesis 1:1, where Bereshit, in the beginning, that when time began, when time was set into motion, so time becomes extremely critical to the biblical writer. First, at the moment where it comes into existence, time. Second, at the end of day 1, where he has now defined one day. So the day-age theory is out the window. It cannot survive the Hebrew text. Cannot survive. Do you see this? Okay. I'd better bring this to an end because I'm really getting overly excited. So that's our session. I hope you've enjoyed it. If I've created any problems for you or difficulties, my prayer is just that God would keep you from error, and I hope I'm not the one to give it to you. Thanks for your time.